The Apothecary Diaries, Volume 12, Parts 1 to 4. Prologue. How she wanted to be worth something. How she wanted to be precious and irreplaceable to someone. The way she and her mother had been to her father. Her mother had disappeared. She'd thought she had been showered with affection because she was a child, but that turned out to be an illusion, only a ploy to gain a moment's tranquility. She and her father had cherished her mother as an invaluable member of their family, when to her mother they had been only tools, interchangeable, replaceable. Out of an excess of trust in her mother, her father had vanished, probably dead somewhere he would never be found. Without her father, who had treasured her like a pearl in his palm, she truly was worthless. What should she do? If she was worthless, then she was useless as well. She didn't know what she should do, so she went looking for her mother. She could be useful. She would be useful. That thought possessed her as she searched. That thought, and a wish. The hope that there might be a place for someone as worthless as her. Chapter 1. The princeling of the main house. It had been 10 days since Gyoku-ou's death. His demise has made the bigwigs very busy. Maomao's job, however, had not changed much. She still made medicine, still examined the sick and the injured and gave that medicine to them. Specializing does make some things easier, she thought. You just have to do one type of work. There was a bit more of that work to do, but it was all of a familiar kind. Once you were in a leadership position, that was no longer true. You had to keep an eye on the work of subordinates that you might not completely understand yourself. When problems arose, prompt decisions were expected, but you couldn't give simplistic answers either. No wonder diligent officials began to break down physically and mentally. All of which is to say, Jinshi was exhausted and weak, as usual, but he was getting his work done. Here I thought he'd learned to step back just a little bit. Even during their regular exams, Maomao, who accompanied the quack doctor, saw officials carting more paperwork into Jinshi's office. She was getting pretty tired of it. I think that's enough for today, Gyokuen said, rebuffing a bureaucrat who had come with more papers. He looked tired too. He met Maomao's eyes and dipped his head, expressionless. It made him look very somber, but the impression was undercut by the duck, Gyoku-ou, who stood beside him, tugging on his robe in hopes of getting some food. I seem to remember him feeding a cat in the rear palace. Apparently he now provided the same service for the duck. Is the Moon Prince really doing all right? The quack doctor asked, watching the bureaucrat leave with his papers. He didn't seem quite so tense with Gyokuen, maybe because they'd known each other since the rear palace. He's certainly tired, but I'm hopeful that he'll soon regain his energy. Gyokuen looked directly at Maomao as he ushered her into the room. If all went as usual, the quack doctor would be dismissed after a perfunctory examination, which would leave only Maomao. All right, young lady. I leave the rest in your hands. The quack doctor departed and Maomao, basically trading off with him, went into Jinshi's bedroom. Yikes! Jinshi lay spread eagle on the bed. Apparently he had used up all his social graces during his interaction with the quack. He didn't seem to have it in him to do anything else today, but a distinct sense of aggravation hovered around him. Rikusen, he was muttering. I'll never forgive Rikusen. The breezy man must have foisted yet more work on Jinshi. You seem tired, sir. I am tired. I'll make this quick, then. Let me see your wound. Jinshi didn't say anything, but sat up looking like a pouting child. He sloughed off the top of his robe and undid the bandages. There's really no need for these anymore. The bandages now were more about concealing the injury than helping it heal. New skin was growing over the scorched, charred old skin, forming a bright red flower. It would have been beautiful if it hadn't been inscribed on human flesh, especially not the flank of someone who was supposed to be very important. They'll also help keep his organs in if he ever gets stabbed in the side. Maomao figured he didn't really need the salve, either, but applied it anyway just to keep things from drying out. Then she wrapped fresh bandages around the site. She'd told him repeatedly to do it himself, but he always wanted her to do it. There. All done. Isn't this bandage a little twisted? No, sir. It's not. It is. I think you should take it off and redo it. So he was going to complain about her bandage wrapping technique, was he? When he did things like that, it usually meant there was something more he wanted to talk about. Maomao sensed trouble coming. She tried to turn right around and leave the room, but Gao Shun gave her such a sad look that she went back. "What seems to be the matter?" she asked. "Funny you should ask," Jinshi replied. It sounded like this story was going to be a long one. Maomao thought getting some rest would do more for his health, but maybe his mind was in worse shape than his body at the moment. Many different people came to visit Jinshi. He had to deal with all of them in between going through his piles of paperwork. Of late, there had been particularly frequent visits from one fellow higher-up from the royal capital and Gyoku-ou's half-siblings. Of the higher-up, Vice Minister Lu, Maomao knew only a smidgen, such as that he was with the Board of Rites, and, to her surprise, he was her colleague Yao's uncle. Chu had mentioned it to her in passing once. So he's the famous uncle. This uncle was supposedly dead set on getting Yao married. Maomao thought the vice minister had given her a funny look once when they passed by each other. Maybe he didn't like that she was Yao's colleague. That Vice Minister Lu does make a nuisance of himself, doesn't he? Maomao said. She'd taken a seat and was sipping at some grape wine. Jinshi's examination was over and now she was just going to listen to him gripe. Surely no one would blame her for exacting a modest fee. He does. He keeps saying we should hurry and go back to the capital. Yes, let's do that, right away, Maomao said earnestly. By all rights, there was no reason for them to stay here. Do you think we could do that so soon? It was Jinshi who resolutely stayed stuck in the western capital. He couldn't go home with everything still in disarray. He was the kind who felt he had to see things through to the bitter end, sometimes to his own detriment. That was probably why Rikusen was able to foist so much work on him. People with a strong sense of responsibility soon grow sick at heart. Maomao knew, just because you were a good person didn't mean good things would happen to you. You would think there would be plenty or people in the western capital who could fill in for Master Gyoku-ou, and Master Gyokuen is still alive too. Master Gyoku-ou was his son, didn't he say anything to you? Quite honestly, Maomao would have expected the man to be distraught when he learned that his son had died in his absence. But Gyokuen, it seemed, was pleading that his age made it impossible for him to return to the western capital. Anyway, I'm not sure that his coming back here wouldn't make things worse. If Gyokuen returned to the western capital, it would be the imperial capital that found itself in dire straits next. Empress Gyoku-ou was now His Majesty's official wife, but there were many who resented her bloodline. The new crown prince, her son, had inherited his mother's red hair and green eyes. Maomao had met him when he was young and the pigment still light, and as he grew older the colors would get stronger. It wasn't hard to imagine him finding trouble because of his unline's hair and eyes. Then there were those who sneered at I-sei Province as a rural backwater. Consort Liua had a son as well, born just a few months after the crown prince, and plenty or people would be willing to trade the one for the other if anything should happen. Yep, politics is a pain in the neck. Maomao munched on a sakuma to go with her wine, a wheat-based treat distinguished by its fluffiness. It was a bit crude to serve as Jinshi's snack, but more than luxurious enough when the food supply was still unstable. Sir Gyokuen would like Sir Gyoku-ou's line to continue ruling here. He said as much in his letter, though I might have preferred if he'd have been kind enough to give me a name. That would explain why none of Gyoku-ou's half-brothers had been willing to take on the role. It was probably the same matter that was continually bringing them to visit Jinshi. Master Gyokuen's second and third sons are here a lot, aren't they? Could we really not leave things to them? I assumed that was what you were talking about together. Maomao still hadn't heard the second son's name, but the third son was named I-sei. He was a well-built man in his mid-30s, in charge of I-sei Province's ports. He was, in fact, one of the visitors who had come to the annex that very day. Sir I-sei is here because he had a request of me. Is it something annoying? Judging by Jinshi's petulant look, it didn't seem like anything good. He asked if I might consider transferring my base of operations. Your base of operations, sir? Maomao tilted her head, unsure what that meant. Oh, it's nothing much. He merely suggested I move from the annex to the main house. I see, sir. Nothing much, right? I believe that's what you just said, Master Jinshi. One could walk from the annex to the main house in a trice. whistling a tune the entire time. The main house is right next door to the administrative office, which would make it easier for them to add to your workload. Is that what this is about? One presumes. And it would really raise some red flags if they tried to get you to go directly to the administrative office, so they're moving you in stages, getting you used to the idea. What am I, a feral cat they've adopted? Jinshi looked spent. Maybe the exhaustion had just caused him to abandon any pretense. If I'm too willing to move, I think the chance to go home will only get further away. Funny thing to say, when he was the one who'd refused to leave. It was a dilemma. On the one hand, they wanted Jinshi to go back to the central region. On the other, they wanted him to stay here in the western capital. Couldn't you just refuse to move your base, sir? Believe me, I'd like to. But do you know what they say about the emperor's younger brother in the western capital these days? Maomao didn't pull any punches. They shout and swoon over your beauty, but at the same time, some conspiracy theorists hold that you masterminded the assassination of Master Gyoku-ou. Did you? No, figured. Jinshi didn't seem particularly adept at underhanded schemes like assassination. Yes. He had been more than willing to use his wiles to get his way in the rear palace when he had been posing as a eunuch, but recently he had become much more reserved. Maomao almost thought he was regressing. That leaves people claiming that I came to the western capital only in order to take it over. Why come to this parched place when you could make lots more profit finagling things in the royal capital? You could buy up grain, then sell it at a high price and wring the money out of them. You sound positively brutal. It was Miss Chu's idea. Chu was something of a chatterbox, and she loved to use Maomao as an excuse to dodge work. Anyway, if you go to the main house, won't you only look even more like you're bent on conquest? Sir Gyoku-ou's brothers and children are at the main house. The suggestion is that security would be better served by having everyone in one place, rather than splitting the guards between the main house and the annex. You're not afraid of someone trying to stab you to get revenge for their brother or father? I like to think that wouldn't happen, Jinshi said after a moment. Really, if anyone were feeling that emotional about it, I would have expected to see at least one assassin already. Commuting to the administrative office certainly would be much easier from the main house. Maomao wondered if she and the rest of Jinshi's entourage would go with him. Not that I'd really like to. She could just picture a weird old fart hanging around, and it worried her. She was pretty sure the freak strategist was staying over there. Hence, Maomao was invested in maintaining the status quo. I can't shake the sense that the move wouldn't have many tangible benefits for you, Master Jinshi. Would it be a problem just to turn them down? You sound strangely unsure of what to do. I understand what you're saying, but I think I have to meet them in the middle, or we won't get anywhere. There it is. Jinshi was too direct, too honest, and sometimes it cost him. Maomao had a certain respect for that part of his personality, but it could be infuriating. He should just put his foot down with them. She was about to say so when Jinshi added, and the main house also has that thing. What thing? She cocked her head. She had no idea what this thing was. The greenhouse. Didn't you see it last time we came? A GG greenhouse. Maomao couldn't stop her eyes from sparkling. She'd seen cactuses planted around the grounds when they had come last year, at which time they had stayed in the main house, but she hadn't heard about any greenhouse. They said that if I moved to the main house, I could use the greenhouse to cultivate herbs. Jinshi glanced at Maomao, then grinned openly. But I gather you'd be just as happy to stay at the annex, Maomao. Whatever do you mean, Master Jinshi? Never fear. I would certainly follow you to the main house. She pounded her chest for emphasis, so hard that she broke down coughing. The move to the main house soon proceeded. The quack doctor was to come with them, not that it would change much of anything. There was, however, at least one person who decided to stay behind. Lahan's brother surprised them. A greenhouse is outside my field of expertise. It's not like you'll be far away. I think I'll stay here, he said. On his head was a duck, and beside him was a goat. Oh, I figured a pro farmer like you, Lahan's brother, would jump at the chance to grow things, Maomao said. Who's a pro? Look, It's not that I couldn't do it. It's just I have to focus on things that fall within the scope of my responsibilities. All I really do is imitate the things I've learned. Maomao thought it was awfully professional to know, and be clear about, what you could and couldn't do, but she kept that to herself. It was certainly better than someone who pretended to possess knowledge they didn't have. My specialty is grains, La Han's brother said. You know a lot more about herbs than I do. I suppose so, he said. Specialty, Maomao observed, but she pretended not to have heard. How nice of her. Anyway, like I said, I'll still be close by. If anything comes up, call me. Thank you, I will. Maomao bowed to La Han's brother. She suspected she would do quite a bit of calling on him, whether he encouraged her to or not. The main house was substantially larger than the annex, and the medical office Maomao and the others were introduced to was bigger too. This must be the place Dr. Li was entrusted with. Of all the medical personnel sent from the capital city, Dr. Li was the most serious and most intimidating. And since their last meeting, Maomao had added most pessimistic to that catalogue. Looks like he's still at the clinic in town. The shelves here were neatly organized, making them easy to use. Although most of the medicine had been taken to the clinic, there were also beds and chairs, neatly arranged. Maomao's group hadn't brought much equipment themselves, so it seemed like this wouldn't take long. Shall I help you clean up your room, miss? The quack asked, and for some reason his eyes were sparkling. He was holding an embroidered curtain. No, I can take care of myself. You can clean up your own room, please. She was not going to spend another night in a hideous, frill-laden chamber. She was even thinking that maybe next time they were running short on bandages, she could tear up that curtain for material. A well-built soldier ambled up. Hey, young lady? Something the matter, Master Lehaku? I need to use the toilet. You don't mind if I leave you here? I don't think it should be a problem. Lehaku was more diligent than he might appear. There was another guard still standing outside the new medical office, so Maomao figured it should be fine. Sorry, I didn't get a chance to relieve myself on my break. No, it's all right. The soldiers got breaks, yes, but a long shift could see them standing for half a day at a time. Bureaucrats occasionally sneered that it must be nice to have so much free time, but the work was demanding in its own way. Lehaku said a few words to the other guard, then went to find the toilet. They didn't know their way around this place, and it seemed like it might take him a few minutes. Maomao busied herself bringing in equipment and unloading the last of their cargo. There, all done. She was just giving a big stretch when she heard a shout from outside. Youch! That was the quack doctor. Maomao went out, wondering what had happened, to find the quack plopped down outside the office, rubbing his shin. There was also a boy holding a wooden training sword. The guard had been keeping an eye on Maomao, apparently to the exclusion of the quack doctor. I have judged you. You intruding insects. The boy must have been 8 or 9 years old. He was dressed in fine clothing and his hair was carefully done up. Those things would seem to mark him out as the scion of a good family, but that didn't matter much right now. Maomao crouched by the quack and looked at his shin. With one of those wooden training swords, even a young kid could cause a nasty bruise. She glared at the boy. What do you think you're doing? He didn't so much as flinch at her raised voice. In fact, he stepped forward in a show of strength. I have delivered punishment upon the criminal. Who's a criminal? Maomao was just stalking toward the child to deliver him a good knuckle to the head when a panicked serving woman rushed up and grabbed him. Young master, you mustn't. She started bowing furiously to Maomao. I'm sorry. I'm so very sorry. Maomao clenched her fist and stared daggers at the naughty child. Hey, let me go. I am going to slaughter the lot of them. The kid shouted. No, young master, you can't do this here. You can't do this. I'm so sorry. With her head still bowed, the serving woman dragged the boy away. Maomao had no choice but to let her fist relax. She was just glad the servant had made a prompt exit. Child or not, she really had been about to smack him one. No mercy for kids who went around whacking people with swords. My apologies, the guard said, his face white. He would be blamed for letting the quack get injured after Lehaku had entrusted him with this job. I don't need any more apologies. Help me get the master physician inside. Maomao touched the quack's shin. Oh, it hurts. he cried, really rather overdramatically. The bone wasn't broken, but he probably wouldn't be walking anywhere for a few days. Judging by that outfit and the servant looking after him, it seemed safe to assume the boy was a relative of Gyokuen's. They'd barely gotten here, and already Maomao had a feeling that there was going to be nothing but trouble. Maomao pressed a damp rag against the quack's leg. Unfortunately, the abused shin had swollen substantially by the next day. It should be better in 2 or 3 days, Maomao told him. In her opinion, the quack could just as well spend that time resting in his room. But he insisted on working, and she couldn't very well chase him out of his own medical office. I really don't think it would be a big problem if he weren't here, she thought, but she wasn't cruel enough to say so out loud. Yuck, it hurts. I'm sorry, miss, Lihaku said, bowing his head. The boy had seized on a brief moment when Lihaku wasn't there. A single, fleeting lapse of attention on the part of the guard. Maybe it had been in part because the interloper was just a child, but it remained that this boy had evaded the guard's scrutiny and managed to harm the quack. It's because they're really guarding me, isn't it? Maomao thought. Outwardly, the soldiers were assigned to the physicians, and so in principle they were supposed to be protecting the quack doctor. But the remaining soldier had actually been watching Maomao. The soldiers didn't specifically give Maomao any special treatment, probably a touch of consideration on Jinshi's part, but there seemed to be a tacit understanding of who she truly was. Much as I hate for people to think of me as that freak's daughter. Therefore, as long as the guards didn't bring it up, Maomao was happy to act the part of an ordinary medical assistant. That was all she was, and nothing more. And yet, she didn't want the quack doctor being put in danger because of that. It seemed the guard yesterday wasn't yet used to protecting VIPs. That was one of the reasons Lihaku had seemed so apologetic about needing to go to the bathroom. He was the one permanently assigned to the medical office, while the other guards came in on rotation, and there were a lot of new faces these days. Knock incoming. Chu entered, pretending to knock on the medical office door. Poor Mr. Quack. I've come to visit you at your sick bed. She was holding some grapes, a common fruit in the western capital. Oh, Miss Chu, that's so kind of you. Whoa, wait, hold on there. Did he really not care that she called him Quack like it was nothing? Miss Maomao, would you like to know which no-good-nick it was that attacked Mr. Quack yesterday? Who? If it was someone from this estate, I assume it had to be one of Master Gyokuen's grandchildren or great-grandchildren. Bingo. It was Master Gyoku-ou's oldest son's son. I might have guessed. Maomao had heard that Gyoku-ou was nearly old enough to be Empress Gyoku-you's father himself, so it wasn't that surprising if he had a grandson the age of the boy who had attacked the quack. They say his name is Gyoku-jun. Chu sketched a character in the air with her finger. Apparently the family had a thing for naming their children after birds, as the U of Gyoku-ou meant nightingale, Jun meant falcon. Chu went on, also, young Gyoku-jun wishes to apologize and is standing outside the medical office with his mother right now. What would you like to do? You could have led with that. Maomao looked at the quack doctor. Rather than actually say yes, he smiled. He's still just a child. After all, if he knows he did wrong and wants to apologize, then it's water under the bridge. Gee, nice guy. Maomao wasn't so sure, but the quack doctor was the victim here, so they would do as he said. Come in, Maomao said as she opened the office door, although she didn't look very happy about it. Gyoku-jun was standing there, not looking any more pleased than Maomao. A woman stood next to him, a timid look on her face. I can't apologize enough for what my son did, she said, bowing deeply. She pressed on the back of her brat's head, trying to make him bow, too, but he said, stop it. I'm not gonna say sorry. You apologize this instant. No way. Gyoku-jun whined. Now his mother was angry. She raised her hand high, and almost at the same moment they heard the slap. Gyoku-jun went crumpling to the ground. An open-handed slap wouldn't leave a lasting mark, but it sure sounded dramatic. Maomao doubted the boy was actually hurt, but he was still physically small enough that his body probably couldn't absorb the blow. I said, apologize. His mother looked like she might burst into tears. Maybe the stress of child rearing was bubbling to the surface. Gyoku-jun sniffled and pinched his lips together. trying not to cry. I'm very sorry," he said, although he obviously didn't mean it. He showed every sign that he would do it again if he got the chance, but the quack doctor was watching his mother anxiously. "That's enough, please, it's really fine. Please, don't bow to me." Gyoku-jun's mother, however, only bowed again, insisting, "I am so sorry." Gyoku-jun was already out of his bow and scowling at the quack. "Signs of a lesson learned, zilch," Maomao observed. When mother and son had left, Maomao was hit by a wave of exhaustion. "Do you think he's all right?" "That was some slap she gave him," the quack said, much concerned about a child who had shown no repentance. "Or, every parent gives their child a good whack now and then, buddy." "Most men can remember doing sword drills until they went unconscious from shouting," said Lihaku. "Exactly. It was nothing much." "He's just lucky she didn't use a closed fist," Chu added. "An open palm isn't such a big deal, although it's trouble if there's an injury somewhere it can't be seen. The solar plexus is a good compromise. It hurts, but it doesn't show," offered Maomao. "What kinds of homes were you three raised in?" the quack asked, drawing back a little. He was a eunuch, but he originally came from a good family, and had probably never suffered the punishment of the iron fist at the hands of his parents. Still, it wasn't that Maomao didn't understand the quack's concern. The boy's mother did seem sort of frantic. "I guess a person could get in a lot of trouble for harming the imperial younger brother's personal physician." "As much trouble as one might get in, though." The mother seemed worried about something more. "Shall Miss Chu explain that one?" Chu said, striking a pose with her finger pointed toward the ceiling. "Do you know?" "Was there a reason?" the quack said, immediately curious. Lihaku looked like he wanted to know too. Maomao had to admit that she was curious, but she affected disinterest, as if she would just listen in if everyone else wanted to know. "Master Gyoku-ou has passed away, and the western capital is all agog about who's going to be the next leader here. Every name you can think of has been suggested, from Master Gyokuen's other sons to Mr. Rikusen from the royal capital, to even the Moon Prince himself." "Yes, I've heard all that," Maomao said. "Mostly from a complaining Jinshi. The one person whose hat hasn't been thrown into the ring is the one person you would expect to be first in line. Did you know that?" Lihaku said slowly. "Normally, you would expect Master Gyoku-ou's son to succeed him. That's how it works, even in the imperial family, right?" He was right, indeed. Precisely. "But that son has been kept completely out of politics throughout his life, on the grounds that he wouldn't need to be involved until later. He's been ruled out on the basis of ignorance, or so the story goes. But doesn't that seem strange?" "Yes, so it does." "You would think he'd have studied a little more," said the quack doctor. "With what I've said so far, I would expect Miss Maomao at least to be able to see where this is going." In reality, Master Gyoku-ou's eldest son is, a lazy, profligate layabout. Chu waved her hands enthusiastically and produced a shower of confetti. "He did get the education you would expect of an intended successor, but then he threw it all away." "Threw it away how?" "He had let's call it a late rebellious phase. By that time, though, he was already married to the woman his parents had chosen for him, and even had a child. But he stole a horse and ran off." "You'd think he was some little kid." Maomao thought about how uncomfortable the mother had seemed earlier. "So his own relatives aren't treating him as the heir apparent, and folks are even suggesting people unrelated by blood to be the next leader. He must be pretty bad," Lihaku said, crossing his arms. "Oh, very bad." "This eldest son is some 25 years old. He abandoned his home several years ago, leaving his wife and child, and well, let's just say he's been up to a lot." "That might explain the mother's mean streak," Maomao admitted. "No doubt her relatives blamed her for not keeping a close enough eye on her husband." "Like what?" Maomao asked. "Master Gyokuen's second-to-last son, his seventh, is 25, too, and the two of them don't get along. They fight all the time. Once, there was a whole thing when they decided on a duel with real-edged weapons. Both of them are so good that no one could stop them. Oh, it was terrible. Then he started brewing his own liquor, borrowing bottles from a nearby distillery, filling them with his moonshine and selling them. That tanked the distillery's reputation. It's worth noting that the place was run by Gyokuen's third daughter. Also, Miss Maomao, you remember how we were attacked by bandits when we went to that farming village? Apparently he was also connected with that incident. Maomao held up a hand for Chu to stop. What seems to be the matter, Miss Maomao? I'm amazed Master Gyoku-ou didn't disown him. Being the eldest son probably helped protect him a little. And Master Gyoku-ou has some odd preoccupations, so he never gave his second or third sons any education in politics at all. Anyway, the eldest son was a well-behaved and capable young man until he went off the deep end, so maybe Master Gyoku-ou thought he would come back around eventually. The son's a powerful guy and a leader. I heard that when he was attacked by the boss of a bandit gang known all around I-sei Province, he went to get the guy back himself. Chu nibbled on a fried dough twist she'd gotten somewhere. She distributed them to the quack doctor and Lihaku as well, and they were also eating. Getting revenge on a bandit, huh? Very much the sort of hero image that Gyoku-ou had so prized. As for Master Gyoku-ou's younger brothers, they're all too busy with business to lead the western capital. But we absolutely can't leave the job to his eldest son. Mr. Rikusen and the Moon Prince were probably put forward to buy some time. Master Gyoku-ou's second and third sons are both clever guys. We can gain enough time for them to learn about politics. I think plans are being laid for the eldest son to be disinherited before then. With Master Gyoku-ou gone, he's lost his protection. You sure know a lot, Miss Chu, the quack doctor said admiringly, although these seemed like things she probably wasn't supposed to know. These were Gyokuen's children. Toughness and stubbornness were guaranteed. They were using the emperor's younger brother in order to buy themselves time. That does explain why that boy's mother looked so worried, Maomao said. Marrying a family's eldest son didn't mean much if that son got himself kicked out of the family line. And if her own son went on to injure the imperial younger brother's physician, well, that would be enough to make the blood run cold. In light of all that, it seems likely that the second or third son will be assigned to serve under the Moon Prince for a while, and the other one will be assigned to Mr. Rikusen. If one of them proves to be an especially quick study, that means we'll be able to go back to the central region all the sooner. And speaking of going back, Miss Chu had better get back to work. She stood up as if to signal that the conversation was over. She was done with her snack. Anyway, Maomao raised her hand. Miss Chu? Question. Yes, Miss Maomao. What is it? Maomao recalled that they were now stationed in the main house. Does this worthless layabout of a son ever come to the main house? Not very often, but I gather he stops by to see family every once in a while. It's certainly possible you might bump into him. Chu gave a broad wink. Please don't jinx it. Maomao foresaw many travails in her future. She did the best thing she could do. She shook her head and tried to forget about it. Chapter 2, The Greenhouse and the Chapel. When Maomao had tidied up her new room, she went to see the rumored greenhouse. Oh my gosh! She exclaimed, her eyes shining, as she observed the facility. It was a building of brick and wood, parts of the ceiling and walls made of transparent glass so sunlight could get in. Inside, they were growing exotic succulents and even cucumbers. Cucumbers were a vegetable you could pluck out of the fields in summer, an easy way to get some water, but in the western capital they were treated as rare and valuable goods. It's difficult to grow cucumbers in the West, where they're considered a sign of wealth. For that reason, we often serve fresh cucumbers when we have visitors from farther west. They also happen to be a favorite of Master Gyokuen. He likes to eat them sandwiched between pieces of thin sliced bread. This explanation was being proffered by the gardener who ran the greenhouse. He'd even kindly prepared some bread and butter for a taster, and looked ready to whip up a little something for them to try right there. However, Miss Maomao, you're starting to dance. Yeah, miss, take it easy. There's people watching. Chu and Lihaku looked at her, vaguely concerned. Hey, I know that, Maomao said, even as she whipped a pair of scissors out from amidst the folds of her robes. Cucumbers, she sang out. Cucumber leaves, cucumber stems. The moment she took one of the vegetables by the stem, however, the gardener had a hand firmly on her shoulder. Forgive me, but what, may I ask, do you think you're doing? A vein pulsed on his forehead. I just thought, cucumber season is almost over. You won't need these much longer. It was only going to get colder. Greenhouse or no greenhouse, Maomao suspected, it would soon be impossible to grow cucumbers. They can still be harvested. The gardener's grip got firmer. The leaves and stems, to say nothing of the fruit itself, of course, are all potential medicinal ingredients, but they'll be useless if they wither first. If I don't take them now, when will I have the chance? Maomao said, meeting the gardener's gaze and refusing to back down. They found themselves locked in a staring contest. These are for food, the gardener said, his eyes bulging. The western capital is facing an unprecedented crisis. Medicine is in desperately short supply. Don't you think you should help? By now, they were using substitutes for many medicines. This was no time to be growing vegetables just to indulge someone's culinary inclinations. I'm given to understand that you've received permission to use the greenhouse. I have to wonder, however, if they also told you that you could just do whatever you wanted with the plants that are already here. These cucumbers are on their way out, and they'll have hardly any nutritional value. Anyway, don't you think the obvious thing would be to use them as medicinal ingredients? Maomao and the gardener continued their standoff. After a brief stalemate, Chu arrived with the gardener's superior. The boss gave the gardener the rundown, but the man refused to capitulate. I don't think things here are quite what they told the Moon Prince, Chu observed. I think this boss is the kind who avoids telling his people any bad news in order to put on a good front for the dignitaries from out of town, replied the surprisingly perceptive Lehaku, capably reading the situation. He was exactly right, and the gardener was the unfortunate victim. Here was a man who'd even had bread made so that they could try the products of his beloved greenhouse. Maomao had to admit she felt a little bad for him. But this wasn't what they had been told. Why does he think I came to the main house? In the end, it was decided that Maomao would use only 1/3 of the greenhouse. The soon-to-be out-of-season cucumbers would go to her. However, with many an aggrieved look at Maomao, the gardener, on the edge of tears, set about making an authorized personnel-only sign to keep her out of his succulents. What kind of medicine can you make with these? Lehaku asked as he helped Maomao gather the cucumbers and harvest their leaves and stems. They're very common in antipyretics. They're also effective against food poisoning and encourage urination. They can be used to induce vomiting as well. Wait, when would you need to induce vomiting? When you've taken more than the necessary amount of poison, for example. That's not a thing people normally do. Lehaku smiled genially even as he delivered the sharp quip. It was one of his virtues that he wasn't quick to anger, but if Maomao could have anything she wanted, she might have wished for him to have the particular quickness of wit that Lahan's brother possessed. She and the others collected the vegetables, the leaves, the stems, and even the vines. Then they pulled the naked cucumber plants up by the roots, leaving only empty earth behind. The gardener looked at Maomao as if she had killed his parents, but she paid him no mind. Somewhere along the line the duck, a perfectly ordinary duck like you might see anywhere, arrived and started pecking at the insects that emerged from the freshly turned earth. What are you going to plant now that you've got a plot to work with? Lehaku asked. Good question. I was thinking maybe I'd start by just planting every kind of seed I have on hand. I don't know what's going to grow in the greenhouse, so maybe I can start by seeing what takes. Every kind of seed? Is the space for that? Maomao paused. Maybe if we tear up that other cucumber plot too. It looked like sparks would fly once more between her and the gardener. Two people who refuse to give an inch are always far from the path of peace. Miss Maomao, what's the matter, Miss Chu? Chu seemed to have spotted something. She was pressed against the glass wall and peering outside. There's a chapel over there. Mind if I go take a look? A chapel? Chu pointed, and Maomao saw a building in the distinctive Western style. There were plenty of similar ones dotting the Western capital. Most of them seemed to have religious functions. It's not quite like the one we were in before, though. There had been a chapel-like building on their visit last year, but this was different. Curious, Maomao followed Chu over. She'd heard that chapels were something like shrines. It certainly has the somber atmosphere, she thought as they entered. It was a simple hexagonal space, a single room. However, light poured through the windows, which were adorned with pictures made of colored glass, dappling the otherwise plain floor with beautiful colors. It did indeed leave Maomao with an indescribable feeling of wonder. Chu seated herself in the very middle of the room and started mumbling something. Maomao sat beside her. She didn't really know what was going on, but stayed quiet until Chu was done talking. Lihaku waited outside. The chapel would be a little crowded with all three of them in there. Phew. After a moment, Chu looked up. Coming from her, this was all a little bit odd. Miss Chu, what were you doing there? Maomao asked. I was using an old language from another country to ask. Oh Lord, do you see us? I don't get it. What's that mean? It's a line from the holy text of a foreign religion. You know, there are lots of very pious believers in the Western capital. If you can work in a line of scripture here or there while you're chatting, it can do wonders for your business. Chu took some writing utensils from the folds of her robe and jotted something down. Here, Miss Maomao. It looks like you're going to be living here for the foreseeable future, so you might as well learn it. On the paper, she had written the words she had been speaking, spelled out phonetically so that Maomao could read them. I really don't think I need to. Maomao couldn't have cared less about this subject, and had no interest in learning these words. No, number. I think you should. Chu didn't back down. She gripped Maomao's shoulders and looked her squarely in the eye. She wasn't leaving the apothecary with much choice. Here we go. 1, 2. Oh Lord, are you there, Lord? O.L. Lard, are you the Lard? You sound like a babbling baby. Maomao thought she had said the words just the way Chu had written them, but apparently there was something wrong with her pronunciation. Let's try again. Let's not and say we did. Come on. This is the perfect opportunity. Chu was proving unusually stubborn. When they'd repeated the phrase several times and Maomao's diction had begun to improve, Chu finally let her go. While she was at it, she taught Maomao the proper gesture of prayer, although Maomao doubted how much good it would do her. As they came out of the chapel, they caught Lihaku yawning. Bored, probably. I'm gonna give you a pop quiz on this the next time we come by, Chu warned Maomao. Yeah, okay, Maomao said. As far as she was concerned, there wasn't going to be a next time. Let's go back for now and get some food, Miss Chu. She was confident the subject of food would divert the ever-famished attendant. Chu liked to take her meals with Maomao in order to avoid her mother-in-law, and Maomao anticipated prompt agreement. Good idea. Mr. Quack must be starving too. By the way, how is he attending to his bathroom needs? Chu showed no shame in the question. I take him to the toilet whenever I'm there, said Lihaku, who could carry the Quack around in his arms. He should be fine. I left him with a bedpan. It's for female use, so I think it should work for him, Maomao replied, as unconcerned as Chu. The Quack was a eunuch, so he lacked the distinguishing feature of most men. Gee, I suddenly feel bad for the old guy. Let's get back, huh? Lihaku said, picking up his pace. He really did look unusually concerned. Chapter 3, Gyoku-ou's children. When Maomao and the others got back to the medical office, they heard voices talking inside. Is there a patient here? Maomao wondered. If the Quack doctor was examining them, then she'd better get in there and trade off with him, quick. She opened the door. Hello, we're back, she said. Oh, hello, young lady. Welcome back, everyone. The doctor was chatting with a young man Maomao didn't recognize. Who's this? He was probably younger than Maomao, a smallish man with kind eyes. His face was attractive enough, but perhaps didn't look like much in the Western capital, where there were brawny men to spare. Is this a patient? Maomao asked. Oh, number. He's a visitor. He came to say a polite hello, the Quack answered, his injured leg resting on a chair. You must pardon the intrusion, the small-built young man said, giving her a carefree smile. And you must pardon me for failing to introduce myself sooner. My name is Yu Hulan, and I'll be serving the Moon Prince. Oh, I see. I'm Maomao. She met his polite bow with a deep one of her own. You, huh? That was a name she seemed to be hearing a lot lately. This young man, you see, he's supposed to serve the Moon Prince, the Quack offered. He's Master Gyoku-ou's son. Indeed. I'm still quite young. I beg your indulgence with me. Gyoku-ou's son? Maomao tilted her head, Perplexed, he seemed like the polar opposite of his father. Where was the resemblance? Chu spared the boy only a brief dip of her head. Maybe she knew him already. Master Gyoku-ou's honored son, you say? She said. Yes, Mom, his third and youngest. I never dreamed I would have the honor of serving the Moon Prince. Hulan was beaming. Maomao had heard that Jinshi and Rikusen would each have one of Gyoku-ou's sons assigned to help them. One would get the second son, the other the third. This young man, however, was not quite what she'd been expecting, and she was a little taken aback. I just figured he would be more full of himself. This was the son of the man who had attempted to use Jinshi like a pawn? At a glance, anyway, he looked perfectly humble. He was sipping tea with the quack doctor, a eunuch, and didn't hesitate to act polite to Maomao. He was nothing like she would have imagined. Certainly not the raging tempest of a man that might have been suggested by the name Hulan, which meant tiger and wolf. My next eldest brother is serving Master Rikusen. I do hope you'll look kindly upon each of us. If the second son had been assigned to Rikusen, and the third to Jinshi, perhaps it was in deference to their respective ages. I wouldn't be surprised if the second son is older than Jinshi. And when you had to order someone around, it made things easier if they were younger than you. I've come for more than just greetings today. I'm also here to offer my apologies, Hulan said. What for? My nephew injured the master physician, and I am deeply sorry for that. He's still young, and as my father's first grandchild he's been rather spoiled. I will accept any punishment on his behalf. Only please look generously upon my nephew. Who the heck is this guy? He sure didn't seem like Gyoku-ou's child. He had the deferential attitude of someone who had already spent decades as a buffer between a superior and their subordinates. Hulan was kind enough to bring snacks and wine. And it's so hard to get snacks these days. I can't thank him enough, the quack doctor said. He held up a basket of steamed buns. There were 2 bottles of wine beside it. Well, now, this is special grape wine from the western capital, although I fear I don't know whether it will be to your taste. In hopes of finding something you'd enjoy, I brought 2 varieties, one more alcoholic and one less. What an excellent choice of gift. Maomao felt an urge to cling to the wine bottles, but resisted. Now, then, if you'll excuse me, I must get back to work, Hulan said. Oh, please, stay a moment longer. Hulan, you're still young, and youth should take its time to relax, said the quack, who by now had adopted an air of total informality with the young man. I'm afraid I couldn't. My uncles and aunts told me to make sure I studied diligently at the foot of the Moon Prince. I'll work as hard as I can to catch up to everyone else, and meanwhile, I do hope you'll look favorably on me. Hulan gave another elaborate bow and left the office. I have to say, I don't see any wolf in him, Maomao remarked. The tiger and the wolf of Hulan's name suggested someone greedy and violent. It was a strong name, yes, but not a very good one. Yeah, he seems more like a loyal mutt, Lihaku added, and Maomao agreed with him completely. After Hulan had left, the quack told them about Gyoku-ou's children. They say Master Gyokuen had 4 children. Young Hulan is the youngest of them. Maomao and the others lost no time turning Hulan's gift of steamed buns into their snack. Got to make sure there's nothing in them, Maomao thought, her old habit of checking food for poison rearing its head. They were filled with meat, and she was perfectly happy to make them her lunch. She was only sorry she couldn't have the wine with them, but she was on duty. After all, the oldest is 25, and then the rest of the children were born in successive years, except Hulan. He's a little younger, about 18. Isn't that right, Miss Chu? The quack asked as he poured tea into some cups. Oh, yes, very right. Master Gyoku-ou's children go, eldest son, eldest daughter, second son, and then the third son bringing up the rear at 18 years old. Chu was putting out some soup she'd reheated. Maomao took a bowl and passed it to Lihaku, who stood slightly apart from the quack doctor. The quack prepared the tea without getting up, while Lihaku was as vigilant as ever. After spending more than 6 months in each other's company, each knew their role. That's an odd collection. Do they perchance have different mothers? Maomao asked, sitting in a chair and breaking open a bun. The filling spilled out, meat and the mushrooms and bamboo shoots. Not at all. Unlike his father, Master Gyoku-ou only had one wife. Huh. That is quite different from Master Gyokuen, the quack said, sounding surprised. It wasn't unusual for men in Li to have more than one wife, but 11 was enough to make Gyokuen the subject of talk. Even the emperor only had enough wives to count on one hand. Yes, there were 2,000 consorts and ladies in the rear palace, but between considerations of family background and resources, they weren't necessarily all people His Majesty could easily take to bed. Lehaku spoke up. You know, I heard a rumor about Master Gyoku-ou's wife. His ears and mouth were participating in the conversation, but his eyes continued to scan the area outside the medical office. What kind of rumor? Maomao, having carefully studied the bun, now popped it into her mouth. The seasonings were characteristic of the central region, and she was surprised to realize it made her a little bit homesick. I heard she's always had good business sense, that she used to be a real go-getter. After the birth of their second son, she boarded a foreign trading vessel for a business venture, except it was involved in a shipwreck. Unluckily, things weren't very good in the country where she wound up, and she had to stay there for several years. That's quite a story. I'd expect to see more of someone like that, though, said Maomao. So far, she hadn't seen Gyoku-ou's wife even once. She'd assumed that meant she was just a chaste, retiring woman who spent her time supporting her husband, but it seemed strange that Maomao hadn't so much as seen her face since Gyoku-ou's death. Chu picked up the story. She came back years later, but rumor has it she wasn't the same woman. She'd become someone who supported her husband from the shadows, where nobody would see her. I'm sure a lot happened to her in those farmlands. When Maomao looked closely, she saw Chu's plate, and hers only had one extra bun on it. She would have to watch out for her. Do you think that played into why Master Gyoku-ou hated foreigners so much? Maomao asked. Who can say? We'll sure never know now. Chu didn't sound very interested, happily munching on a steamed bun instead. Lehaku had returned to his food as well, apparently having shared everything he knew about the wife. Maomao didn't have any follow-up questions to speak of either. You know, wasn't that girl you examined Master Gyoku-ou's granddaughter? The quack asked. That's right. His oldest daughter's daughter. The girl had developed an intestinal blockage because of her habit of eating her own hair. Taniu had performed the surgery, but Maomao had attended to her care after that. The stitches had already come out cleanly. It must have hurt so much, having her stomach cut open. How's the wound? Is it all right now? The quack asked, his brow furrowed in genuine concern. You can hardly even tell it was there, Maomao thought. She hated to admit it, but Taniu was an excellent surgeon. Maybe you had to be a little crazy to be so good. Heaven, the saying went, did not give two gifts to one person. Yes, it's much better, Maomao said. I visit her periodically to check on the progress of the scar, but that's all. In fact, I'm going tomorrow. Treatment was coming along nicely. She wished a certain abdomen-scorching noble would be such a good patient. Oh, that's good, that's good. I'm glad to hear it. The quack looked relieved. Maomao, though, thought he should worry more about his own leg. Chapter 4, The Sheltered Wife. The next day, Maomao went to see Gyoku-ou's granddaughter, just as she'd told the quack doctor she would. What was her name again? Maomao, as we've established, was not excellent at remembering people's names. But she got by okay, so it was fine, right? As so often, Lehaku and Chu were with her. And one more person. Oh, please, don't mind me. For some reason Gyoku-ou's third son, Hulan, was there too. I just thought I might tag along. I like to see my elder sister and my niece once in a while. Gee, and here I thought your honor was serving the Moon Prince. Are you sure you don't need to work? She asked, careful not to let her skepticism show on her face. You needn't worry, this doubles as work. I thought it would be a good chance to ask for some details about the job my father was doing. You're going to have a chat with your sister? That didn't sound like work to Maomao. She gave him a quizzical look. No, my mother. She lives with my sister. She says there's too much commotion at the main house for her. Ah, the much discussed mother. So she retired from the main stage, but was still supporting Gyoku-ou in the background. It would make sense, then, to ask her about his business. At the entryway to the house, They were greeted by the young patient and her mother, as well as a woman somewhere past 40. Is that Hulan's mother? Maomao wondered. She'd visited this house several times, but this was the first she'd seen of her. Maybe she was there waiting, not for Maomao and her band, but for Hulan. I think I'll call her Hu's mum for the time being. She didn't know if Hulan was even going to introduce them, but if he did, knowing how rarely she was likely to encounter this woman left Maomao without much desire to remember her name. In the same vein, she dubbed Hulan's older sister Hu's sis. She did indeed resemble Hu's mom, as one might expect of a mother and daughter, but Hu's mom possessed a beauty of a kind that might make a person possessive. No doubt she had been a popular woman in her younger years. Mother, sister, Hulan said, bowing deeply to each of them. It's been much too long. Yes, too long indeed, Hu's mom said, and then she looked at Maomao and the others and slowly dipped her head. Her features resembled those of Hu's sis, but she had a retiring quality and a calmness in her eyes. Physically, her eyes were more downturned than her daughter's, but she exuded a unique loveliness. Hulan, I think that's enough of a greeting when we have visitors. She turned to Maomao and her group. You must accept my apologies for my son's thoughtlessness. Apparently this was where Hulan got his modesty. Her voice was as reserved as her appearance. Not at all, Maomao said, then glanced at the granddaughter. If I may, perhaps I could examine the patient's scar now? Yes. Please do take good care of Xiahong. The girl gave her best bow. Xiahong, Little Red, was presumably a pet name, but Maomao had never heard her actual name. She looked quite different now from how she had before. Her hair, once dark, was now mostly light, and evenly trimmed. The roots were a light brown that verged on golden, while the ends were still black, giving the impression of a brush that had been dipped in ink. All right, I'll see you later, said Hulan. He and his mother would hold their own conference while Maomao did her exam. Maomao and the others entered the room where she always did her exams. Well, maybe exam was a strong word. Mostly she just inspected the scar, then applied some salve in hopes that it wouldn't be too visible in the long run. There were no servants in the house. The scar on her abdomen may not have been very obvious, but the family didn't want it to be public knowledge that the girl had had surgery. If the scar vanished more or less entirely by the time she was grown up, that would be the best of all worlds. I'm finished for today. If you find you need more salve, please don't hesitate to come to the medical office and I'll prepare some, but common stuff from the market would be fine too. Thank you so much, Hu's sis said, bowing deeply, although it wasn't really that kind of visit. She'd set out tea and snacks on a table. Chu's eyes gleamed as if to say, let's have a bite before we go home. Hulan isn't back yet, anyway. Why don't we take it easy? I don't think there's any special need for us to wait for Master Hulan to leave, Maomao said. What were they? A bunch of adolescent girls who had to do everything as a group. They had Lihaka there as a bodyguard. It would be fine. Miss Maomao, are you telling poor, starving Miss Chu to walk right past these beautiful, delicious-looking treats and not eat them? Go ahead and eat them, Miss Chu. Woohoo! I knew you were one of the good ones, Miss Maomao. I could kiss you. She came at Maomao with her lips puckered, but Maomao shoved her away. Don't be like that, Chu said. Maomao said, and set a glass of milk tea in front of Chu. Chu promptly mixed in some honey and stuffed a baked treat into her face. It was a cookie with dried grapes and walnuts worked into it. It smelled richly of butter. Maybe there was wheat germ in there, because the color was pale, but it would be very nutritious. It was certainly enough to pass for a luxurious indulgence with ingredients so hard to come by. Maomao nibbled on one of the cookies herself. As for Lihaku, he had his guard duties to think of. He only stared intently at the sumptuous-looking treats. Yes, he was doing his job, but Maomao still felt a little bad for him. Excuse me? Maomao said to Hu's sis. Yes. What is it? Would it be possible to take a few of these cookies back with us? A souvenir for the quack doctor. Maomao worried that maybe she was out of line, but Hu's sis smiled faintly and nodded. She no longer seemed on edge the way she had when they first met. In fact, she seemed very collected. Very well, she said. I'll get some for you right away. Just as she was about to leave the room, Xiahong tugged on her sleeve. I can get them. Xiahong went out, looking happy. She, like her mother, seemed to be feeling much better than before. Chu watched the mother and child with a smile as she munched on her snack. Maybe she was silently willing them to bring back lots and lots of goodies for them. I gather the lady of the house is staying with you, Maomao said. If there had been nothing to talk about, she would have stayed silent, but since she had a subject she could bring up, she did. Whose sis had been kind enough to give them these treats. Maomao wanted to repay her by trying to be at least somewhat sociable. Yes, that's true. She feels there's rather too much commotion at the main house, so she lives here instead. Although she's also worried about Gyoku-ou. This was whose sis's own mother they were talking about, yet somehow she didn't look entirely happy. Maybe the two of them don't get along? Maomao wondered, and that was when they heard the eek from outside. Whose sis jumped up and rushed out of the room. Maomao and the others following close behind. The shout had come from Gyoku-ou, who was in the garden of the mansion with someone pulling on her hair. Namely, that obnoxious brat. The little monster, Gyoku whatever it was pulling Gyoku-ou's hair. His minder was nearby, but she only looked on apprehensively and gave no sign of trying to stop him. Gyoku-jun, what in the world are you doing? Whose sis ran over to separate Gyoku-ou and the little monster. Gyoku-jun. She stood protectively in front of her daughter and glared at her nephew. Gyoku-jun, meanwhile, tossed aside a few stray strands of Gyoku-ou's hair that had gotten wrapped around his fingers. What was I doing? I was just trying to help her get rid of that filthy hair. He didn't sound like he felt the least bit guilty. In his left hand he held a mud ball that he was preparing to smash into Gyoku-ou's hair. It is not filthy. Gyoku-ou sniffled. Whose sis looked somewhat uncomfortable, even though she was defending her own daughter. Gyoku-ou is not filthy, she said. She's your cousin. Cousin? But her hair, it looks like an outlander's hair. That's just how it happens to look. There are lots of people in the western capital with light hair, you know that. Whose sis was acting very calm with her not even 10-year-old nephew, but it was obvious she was working hard to control herself. But auntie, you used to throw stones at outlanders when you saw them. My father told me so. Gyoku-jun was scowling. Gyoku-ou studied her mother's expression, whose sis looked even more uncomfortable than before. She remembered. Maomao realized Gyoku-jun was doing things that whose sis had once done herself. You can't change the past, so it only makes you feel more and more guilty. No, don't. Gyoku-jun had chosen that moment to let fly with his mud cake, but it never left his hand. All right, that's enough pranks. Chu had stopped his small fist cold. When did she? Chu had gotten behind Gyoku-jun in the blink of an eye. Hey, what do you think you're doing? Now, water is a precious resource here. Just think how hard it would be to wash if someone got all messy with something like this. Chu smiled pleasantly as she crushed Gyoku-jun's hand, mud ball and all. It must have hurt, because when she finally released him, his face twisted and he rubbed his hand. What do you think you're doing? Do you know who I am? Gyoku-jun demanded, tears threatening to form in his eyes. I certainly do. You're Master Gyokuen's great-grandchild, Master Gyoku-ou's grandchild, Master Shiki-ou's eldest son, the Honorable Master Gyoku-jun. Well, if you know all that, then, however, Chu continued, they say a woman's hair is her very life. I don't know if that's true exactly, but I can guarantee that acting this way won't make you popular with the ladies for 1 second. Chu looked at the hair-pulling victim, Gyoku-ou, who was hiding behind her mother with tears in her eyes and sniffling. Lehaku kept a respectful distance. As a bodyguard, he couldn't get too far from Maomao and the others, but he showed no sign of intervening. He seemed to consider this just a spat between two kids. Maomao took the same tack. Chu was handling this, and she wasn't going to gang up on some kid. Having said that, Gyoku-jun still didn't look like he had learned anything from this moment, and Maomao's impression of him as a little beast only grew. Fine. I don't care about her dumb hair. But did you know they were dyeing it all this time? That proves she's an outlander. She's an outlander changeling who's here to hurt our family. Changeling? Maomao cocked her head. She hadn't meant to jump into the conversation, but it was such an unfamiliar word that she'd opened her mouth before she could stop herself. A changeling is a child born to fairies or the like and then swapped with a human child. Chu explained helpfully. Just look at her. You can tell, Gyokuen said. Both her parents have black hair. But hers is ... like that. Anyone can see there's something wrong with her. They say she's my cousin, but that's a lie. So a changeling is like a devil's child? The term referred to a child who didn't resemble her parents. As the expression suggested, it was considered an ill omen. In any case, there was something Maomao felt obliged to correct. Two parents with black hair can still have a child with a different hair color. You know, it's like how some cats might be black and white while their siblings are striped, even if they come from the same litter. Maomao thought she was putting it in a way that a child could understand, but the little monster called Gyokuen wasn't even remotely listening. Maomao glared at the lady-in-waiting who was supposed to be watching him, willing her to do something, but the woman only looked away. He hasn't learned a thing since he injured the quack doctor. She thought a good whack would be the quickest way to administer a lesson, but when she glanced back again, she found Chu talking to the boy. Master Gyokuen, Chu said. Are you very important? She wore her usual indolent smile and clapped her hands a couple of times to brush the mud off them. You better believe I am. For I am Gyokuen. Yes, I know. So, why are you important? Because I'm the oldest son of this house. Someday I will lead the western capital. So you're important because you're Master Shikkyu's child? That's right. Gyokuen puffed out his chest. Nothing like borrowing daddy's authority. It was one major reason why Hu's sis couldn't take a firmer hand with Gyokuen. Maomao glanced at Xiaohong's head as she clung to her mother. The woman must have heeded Maomao's warning to stop dyeing the girl's hair, because there was a good stretch of light color there now. But there were specks of blood by the roots. That must have been a pretty good pull. Maomao felt any possible sympathy for Gyokuen wither and die. All right, next question, Maomao said, taking over from Chu. Why is Master Shikyu important? Chu stepped back, allowing her to lead the conversation. That's because he's Grandpa's son. Oh, I see. Maomao's lips twisted. Even though Master Gyoku-ou is gone now? By this point she was grinning outright. It was not a very nice way to put the matter to a child. She was using the words like a blade to eviscerate him. Gyokuen's face went blank. Whatever the central government may or may not have thought of Gyoku-ou, there were many who loved and admired him in the western capital, and to speak of his death here was perhaps not the smartest move. Maomao knew it was petty and mean, but she was determined not to feel any remorse. Xiaohong's mother couldn't say anything, so she would. Master Shikyu is still around, I guess. But I hear he lives quite at his leisure. Do you still believe he'll ultimately lead the western capital, or are you saying you're the appropriate instrument to rule this place? Again, a harsh way to speak to a child not yet 10 years old, but she wanted him to get this through his head. Are you yourself important? She asked. If no one ever disciplined an obnoxious brat like this his entire life, he was never going to grow up to become a decent politician. If he coasted along, learning nothing, on the assumption that his bloodline would land him in the same position as his father, he would eventually be sorely disappointed. Gyokuen paled before her eyes. Maybe he was beginning to understand. In his own childish way, he might be descended from the son and grandson of the undisputed most powerful man in the western capital. But even the most powerful protectors could die at any time, and a child with no protector would end up as a puppet at best, banished at worst. My dad would never die. Gyokuen exclaimed. Nobody knows when they're going to die. That's what it means to be human. Now, you don't mind if I treat Lady Xiaohong's head, do you? Maomao took Xiaohong by the hand, intending to lead her back to the room, but a clear, commanding voice said, "Wait just a minute." Maomao turned to find a middle-aged woman standing there. Whose mum? Grandma? Gyokuen cried and hugged his grandmother, clinging to her. Hulan was there, too, just behind her. These people, they said the worst things. Gyokuen said, clutching his grandma with his muddy hands. There was no trace of the smart-ass from moments before. Now he was all sweet grandchild. Hulan smiled wryly at his nephew's antics, then put his hands together in a gesture of apology to Maomao and the others. As for Hu's mom, she looked down at Gyokuen, then at Maomao, then let her gaze drift over Hu's sis and Xuehong before it finally settled on Chu. There was quite a bit of commotion out here. Whatever is going on? She asked, her voice gentle to placate her grandson. They said further is going to die. Gyokujun yelped. Dumb kid. Twisting what they'd said so that it wouldn't look like it was his fault. Hu's mom's face darkened, and she shot a glance at Hulan to see his face. Hulan didn't say a word, but it was clear from his expression that he didn't intend to serve as his nephew's ally. Gyokujun. Is this true? Hu's mom asked. Of course it is. Really? Why yes. I was watching the whole time, you know. At that remark from his grandmother, Gyokujun's expression did another flip. He turned to his uncle, Hulan, but the young man made no move to help him. Kid's a master of the quick change, huh? The boy had yet to develop his uncle's force of personality. What were you doing to Xuehong? Why are your hands all muddy? It was all a misunderstanding. Gyokujun started to stumble through an excuse, but if they had seen the whole thing, there was really no point. At the same time, though, Maomao started to sweat too. A few seconds later, Hu's mom gave an exasperated sigh. Gyokujun, go back to your room. Take him, please, she said to the lady in waiting. The attendant led him off, although he didn't neglect to stick his tongue out over his shoulder as he went. You must forgive such rudeness in front of our visitors, Hu's mom said, bowing to Maomao and Lihaka in turn. She seemed to understand that her grandchild was a bit of a lout. Maomao had worried she might get a piece of the woman's mind for bringing up Gyoku-ou's death, but Hu's mom didn't say anything about it. Instead she turned to Hu's sis and Xuehong. Xuehong, would you come here for a moment? Xuehong left her hiding place behind Hu's sis and went over to her grandmother. Hu's mom began to run a comb through Xuehong's hair. It doesn't look too bad. I'll give Gyokujun a serious talking to later. Mother. Hu's sis said, indignant. Yes, that's it. You know how cruel Gyokujun can be to Xuehong, so why did you bring him here? She brought him. Ordinarily, Gyokujun would be in the main house. Maomao could see why Hu's sis wouldn't want her mother deliberately bringing her nephew here when they both knew what he would do to her daughter. Things aren't easy for Gyokujun at the main house, you know. I wish you would understand that. Understand that his mother can't protect him by herself. What else are we supposed to do? What's this about his mother? She can't protect him? His mother, presumably, was the woman who had come to apologize for Gyokujun injuring the quack the other day. The one who had tried to force Gyokujun's head down, weeping herself the whole time. One heard much talk of Gyoku-ou's no-account eldest son, but one didn't hear nearly as much about his bride. This isn't the time. We still have visitors, Hu's mum said. Not the time? Maomao understood what she was saying, but didn't much like the way she said it. Hu's sis bit her lip and glared at Hu's mum. Hu's mom simply walked away as if nothing had happened. Hulan followed, bowing to them as he went. Hu's sis had an uneasy smile on her face. In spite of all that had happened, she seemed to want to put on a brave front for Maomao and her companions. I'm sorry you had to see that. Shall we go back? She asked. It was clear how much effort she was expending. Xuehong sniffled and tugged on Maomao's skirt. Please don't talk bad about Grandpa. Gyoku-ou wasn't just Gyokujun's grandfather, he was Xuehong's too. After a second, Maomao said, You're right. I'm sorry. She had to admit that she had been wrong this time, and apologizing was the right thing to do. Chapter 5, Third Son, Second Son, Eldest Son. Hulan's work often brought him into the orbit of Maomao and her companions. I'm terribly sorry, but perhaps I could ask you to arrange a carriage for me? He asked a servant in a hallway of the main house. The servant seemed used to Hulan's humble demeanor. Apparently it wasn't just an act he put on for Jinshi. You think he's really Master Gyoku-ou's son? Lehaku asked, squinting as he watched Hulan walk down the hall. The hulking soldier had a hoe in hand and was working a field. It was no longer just the annex. They had received permission to turn the garden of the main house into farming fields as well, and Lahan's brother had wasted no time beginning cultivation. Lehaku helped, on the grounds that just standing around as a guard would cause him to go soft, and this work doubled as exercise. Then there was the main house's gardener, watching the field come together with tears in his eyes. The greenhouse gardener was giving him a sympathetic pat on the shoulder. Maomao was no longer the gardener's only enemy. "Plenty of kids are nothing like their parents," said Maomao. She was drying cucumber slices in the sun. The greenhouse gardener was glaring especially hard at her, but she contrived not to notice. With Gyoku-ou gone, the political face of the western capital had changed substantially. With Jinshi now taking a more public role, the move toward military expansion was much slower, and the main focus of attention had become how to stabilize the food supply. The hated grasshoppers had assailed the western capital repeatedly in the past several months. Humans, however, can get used to almost anything, and as the episodes went on, they learned to live with the insects. "They're growing numb," Maomao thought. Still, whenever she saw a grasshopper, she tried to kill it, and it sounded like the people were trying to plow the areas where grasshoppers seemed likely to lay eggs. There was even a suggestion that the planes should be torched while the larvae were still young and couldn't fly, but unlike in the royal capital, there was scant rain here and no way to know how far the fire might spread. It was deemed too dangerous. Instead, a simple battle of attrition proceeded. Cultivation of fields went on, complete with fall plowing. The past months had seen a number of merchants go out of business, and priority was given to hiring them. "I wonder how much we can actually harvest before winter." That would be the real question, Maomao suspected. She touched each of the cucumber slices, picking up the ones that were dry. That was when she saw someone rushing through the hall of the mansion. "Lady Maomao." It was Hulan. Maomao always felt weird being addressed with such high respect. "And Master Lihaku." "You must pardon me." "Oh, you're Master Hulan, aren't you?" "You don't have to use a title of respect with me. I'm just a bodyguard." "In fact, it makes things a little awkward." "Ah, Lihaku," always saying exactly what Maomao wished she could. "Not at all. I'm still not much more than a glorified gopher, and I know all too little about politics." "I know all too little about anything, really." "Meanwhile, I hear that Lady Maomao, a woman, has already served as a medical assistant for some years now." "And you, Master Lihaku, I gather you're here by the personal request of the Moon Prince." "You are certainly both worthy of respect, and it would never do to be rude to you. Above all, I myself am nothing more than a lackey, not even an official in my own right. I can do no other than show you courtesy, please understand." Hulan was practically snorting with certainty, and his eyes were truly shining. If this was an act, he was doing a very good job. "It's going to be way too much work to get him to stop," Maomao thought, so she decided to live with it. "All right, Master Hulan. Did you need something from us?" she asked. "Yes, Mom. I've brought a paper from the Moon Prince. I intend to give the same one to Dr. Yu and Dr. Lee. He seeks the opinion of those doing medical treatment here." "Would you be so kind as to look at this?" He passed Maomao a sheet of parchment, which she opened and inspected. The text was written in pen, the Western equivalent of a brush, but it wasn't Jinshi's handwriting. It had clearly been written by someone used to handling a pen, presumably someone from the West. Maybe Hulan had written it out himself. It was a list of symptoms: swelling, bleeding, anemia, diarrhea, vomiting. These are symptoms observed in the areas where there are no doctors or apothecaries. The Moon Prince realizes you may not be able to treat these things from afar, but if there are ways to prevent them or cope with them, he requests that you write them down in as much detail as possible. It was hardly unusual for there to be no doctors or apothecaries out in the country. When people in those areas got sick, they treated their problems with folk remedies, and in especially serious cases, the sufferer might go to a folk healer to have prayers said, but that was the extent of what people could do. There was no proper medical treatment available. You should make your instructions as specific as you can. Moreover, resources are limited, so the Moon Prince would be grateful if you would suggest possible substitutes. Whatever one seeks in I-sei Province these days, one can assume it will be in short supply. That was true enough, Maomao agreed. But they were asking for more than she could simply jot down right here and give back to him. I'll see that the master physician gets this. Could we have a little while to work on it? I think he should be done by this evening. She stuck to the pretense that the quack doctor would fill out the paper. We just need to give it to the Moon Prince. Yes. No, I'll come by again this evening to collect it. I really don't think you need to worry about it. She suggested that she might give it to Chu when she inevitably came passing through. No, I'd like to see it for myself, Hulan said firmly. To be quite honest, this was my suggestion, so I'd like to be certain. I see. Quick thinking. Maomao was impressed. She might have known that a wife renowned for her own capabilities would raise a son fit to be someone's aide, but not more than an aide. In addition, if I may ask, is there anything to be careful of in regions where there are no official medical personnel? Hulan asked. That's a big question, Maomao replied, crossing her arms and thinking. Places without doctors have a tendency to be dominated by superstition. Sometimes, folk healers regard medical personnel as a nuisance and will actually chase them away. Maomao pictured someone who had experienced that firsthand, Gyoku-ou, the man with the half-bandaged face. Also, when the body is weakened, there can be outbreaks of communicable diseases. Keep an eye on the health of any of the personnel near those areas to make sure they aren't unwittingly carrying a disease. Understood, Hulan said. Maomao had a few more ideas, but she could write them down in detail later. All right. I appreciate you taking the time, Hulan said, and with another bow, he left. Boy, they really don't resemble each other, Lehaku said. Not a bit, Maomao agreed. So Gyoku-ou's third son, Hulan, didn't resemble his father. What then of the second son? He, too, was different, in his own way. With his fastidious outfit, the second son, Filong, looked every inch the bureaucrat. Unlike Hulan, his presence could be somewhat imposing. If anything, he most resembled Gyoku-ou's oldest daughter in that respect. The main house and the administrative office sat next door to each other. There was even a hallway connecting the two. So although Filong spent most of his time in the administrative building, Maomao spotted him every once in a while. Filong was officially assigned to Rikusen, but he often came to bring papers to Jinshi. Maybe that was a bit of kindness on Rikusen's part, giving Filong a chance to see and be seen by a member of the imperial family. Or maybe he just wanted to foist that much work on Jinshi. Maomao didn't know. I've brought some papers, sir, Filong said, appearing during one of their exams. Maomao pulled the quack doctor back so he wouldn't get in the way. Even as he greeted Jinshi politely, Filong gave the papers to Jinshi's aide, Ba-sen. The pile was separated into 3 parts by dividers. The red divider is new business, the blue one is items which warrant reconsideration, and the yellow signifies formally rejected proposals that have been revised. Not bad. Filong was quite a capable man in his own right. Polite and proper though he was, however, there was no warmth to him. That, too, differentiated him from his father. Maybe Gyoku-ou had concerned himself mostly with his oldest son because the other 2 had each fallen further from the tree. They look similar enough, but it's the attitude. Filong and Hulan were both perfectly competent, but had the distinct air of bureaucrats. That was well and good, since they were training to be aides at the moment, but picturing either of them ultimately standing astride the Western capital as its leader, well, it made one shake one's head. Jinshi seemed like he was planning to go home as soon as possible once their political instruction was over, but I don't know. At this rate, it looked like they might be here for years to come. Speaking of Gyoku-ou's sons, the eldest showed up surprisingly quickly. Maomao heard Gyokujun's joyous cry outside her window. Father, father, father. She looked out to see father and son in the garden, or perhaps we should say the former garden, since half of it had been converted to farmland. So this was the man that brat, Gyokujun, was so attached to. He had hair scruffy enough to make a lion proud, and tanned, rugged limbs. Around his hips he wore the pelt of a deer he had presumably killed himself. Wow, they look just like each other. The newcomer looked exactly like Gyoku-ou if someone had turned back the clock to his younger days. The lady-in-waiting with Gyokuen looked positively anxious. The boy's mother was nowhere to be seen. Maomao was given to understand that it had been a political marriage. Maybe husband and wife didn't get along that well. The best thing I can do is stay out of it, she thought, but she was at least interested enough to steal a glance out the window. The quack and Lihaku felt the same way. They joined her. "That's my boy. Have you been good?" "Of course you have. Here's a gift." The man gave Gyokuen a heaving sack. Excited, the boy looked inside, but the moment he did so, he burst into tears. "What's in there?" Maomao wondered. She soon found out, for tumbling out of the bag came a deer's head. Yes, maybe that was a bit too stimulating for a child's gift. Ha ha ha. The eldest son laughed. "Say hello to tonight's dinner." "We are going to eat this?" Gyokuen exclaimed through the tears and snot. Just when he looked like he was getting it under control, he burst out crying again. "Sorry." "I'm sorry." "Come on, don't cry." "Hey, it looks like a lot happened while I was away." "What's going on?" Gyokuen whispered in his father's ear and pointed toward the medical office. His attendant paled. "I've got a bad feeling about this." And she was right. The eldest son soon appeared at the medical office. "Can we help you?" Lihaku asked, standing squarely in the man's way. He was usually so affable, but at this moment he had put on his best soldier's glare. "My son told me all about you. He said the visitors from the central region have really been throwing their weight around. I thought I'd come say hello to you myself." Gyokuen, hiding in his father's shadow, stuck out his tongue at them. "That little shit." Maomao scowled at him. If she had ever wondered whether he might have learned his lesson, she certainly didn't now. The quack had tucked himself into a corner of the office, openly terrified. "I sincerely apologize if we seem to have been throwing our weight around," Lihaku began. "However, that insect swarm ravaged the western capital, and we're groping around trying to find something, anything, to help make things better. Or would you prefer that visitors not do anything to help, but only stand by, eat your food, and watch?" Lihaku was a good 190 centimeters tall, maybe even a little more. He had some 6 centimeters or so on Gyoku-ou's son, although the other man was still plenty burly. No wonder a diminutive eunuch like the quack doctor was afraid. As for Maomao, she was looking around and pondering, hoping for an opening to knock some sense into the little shit. "If things get physical here, it'll only waste what little medicine and supplies we have left." She gave Lihaku a look, pleading with him that if they were going to start throwing punches, they should do so outside. "Ha! You government bigwigs are something else, you know that?" "Even I know I have to watch my mouth around the real nobles, but now even their lackeys think they can push me around. How am I supposed to hold my head up?" "Eh? Surely you jest." "Sir, I'm only a soldier myself, an underling, as you say. All I do is follow my orders." "Now, this is the physician's office. If you'd still like to talk, perhaps we could do it outside." "Perfect." "Nice work," Maomao thought. More than anything, she wanted to avoid the medical office ending up in a shambles. Lihaku understood that and was trying to move the encounter outdoors. If the son decided to throw down with him, well, Lihaku could probably hold his own at least for a while. Long enough for Maomao to run and call someone. "I guess the ideal outcome is that they don't fight," she thought, but the situation looked like it was ready to explode at any moment. Lihaku understands his position. He was a bodyguard, and if the eldest son decided to turn violent, he would respond in kind to protect Maomao and the quack. But he would understand that he couldn't throw the first punch. As for the little shit who was the cause of the dispute, he's quaking. Gyokuen was clinging to his lady-in-waiting. Unfortunately for him, he couldn't go after the quack doctor like he had before. There were 2 guards aside from Lihaku standing there. If he starts anything, those guards will turn him into a punching bag. The thought had hardly crossed her mind, however, when someone came rushing up. "Shinkyu, brother." It was Hulan. The eldest son's name, Shinkyu, was actually another word for owl, and like Hulan's own name, the connotations were not very positive. Something else suddenly struck Maomao. His name doesn't include Gyoku. "Brother, what are you doing?" Hulan asked. "What does it look like I'm doing?" "I hear our visitors are too big for their britches. That they treat the members of our household like their servants." "Servants, huh?" "True, Gyoku-ou's second and third sons had become aides, and from a certain perspective it might look like they were being put to menial uses. Maybe it wasn't just the little shit Gyokujun, maybe some of the actual servants of the household had their grievances with the people who had come from the royal capital. Please, brother, make sure you hear all sides before you do anything rash. Are you sure you're not just swallowing what Gyokujun says wholesale? Why, I was just here trying to find out the truth, and they asked me to step outside. Whoa, hey, The son had obviously been looking for a fight from the moment the conversation started. Even Lihaku seemed unsure how to respond. Brother Filong and I are learning from the Moon Prince at our own request, Hulan said. Really? Moreover, it was June who was offensive toward our visitors. Huh. Suddenly Shikyu's glare settled on his son. Gyokujun tried to make himself smaller, tearing up once again. Maomao seized her chance and stepped forward. He injured the honored physician here. The poor man was unable to walk for several days. Is that true, Gyokujun? Shikyu was giving the boy a really hard look now. I'm not interested in excuses, Shikyu said, his voice like the low growl of a beast. In his corner of the room, the quack doctor commenced quivering. Gyokujun simply nodded. Shikyu scratched the back of his neck, exasperated, and then he grabbed the gift for his son and brought it over. Here, the sack with the deer head flopped at Lihaku's feet, spilling its contents. The deer's glassy eyes stared vacantly at the sky. I'm sorry for my son's disrespect. Take this as repayment, if you'd be so kind. With that, Shikyu left. I guess there was something to those stories about him, Maomao thought. The word that came to mind was ruffian. I'm sorry. It seems my brother caused a great deal of trouble, Hulan said. Don't apologize. You saved our necks, Maomao said gratefully. The quack doctor hesitantly emerged from his corner, looking around as if to make sure everything was quite all right. Once he realizes his own father won't even back him up, I expect Gyokujun will start to behave a little better, Hulan said. I can only hope so, Maomao replied. As far as she was concerned, the kid showed no sign of having learned anything from his recent travails. She strongly suspected he was going to try something again. Then she looked at the reeking sack and asked, by the way, how are you supposed to eat this thing? She was glad enough to have it, she supposed, but as an ingredient, she wasn't sure what to do with it. Sometimes people stew them to make soup stock, or boil the brains and eat those. Some people also carefully remove the skin and make a decoration of it, if they have a taste for that sort of thing. Unfortunately for them, they had nowhere to display a deer's head. The brains, huh? I have to admit, I'm curious. An unknown ingredient? She had to try it. You'd eat its brains? The quack exclaimed, looking at her incredulously. We might as well. This head's ours now. I'm not sure I want any brains. The quack doctor drew back. Just a small taste for me, Lihaku said, not looking very eager there. Maomao regarded the glassy-eyed head and wished that Shikyu had at least given them the antlers as well. Velvet antler could be turned into an excellent energy tonic. Chapter 6, The Winery. 10 days after they had moved to the main house, Chu paid Maomao a visit at the medical office. Miss Maomao, Miss Maomao. Miss Chu, what is it? You seem even happier than usual today. Maomao was using a pair of scissors to cut up a large cloth, an old sheet that would soon be new bandages. Oh, I am. As a matter of fact, we've been given permission to go out. Lucky us. Yes, and so, here's a riddle. What reason might be behind a person being given permission to go out, do you think? Maomao put down her scissors, then rolled up the shredded sheet as she thought. Is it something medical? Maybe they're short-handed at the clinic in town and they need some help, or maybe they need to improve the nutritional value of the food they're handing out, or try to get some better drinking water. If Chu was coming to Maomao about it, it seemed likely to involve something health-related. Oh, so close. Miss Chu doesn't quite understand, herself. But the Moon Prince describes it as our first case in a while. Ah, yeah, okay. If this was coming from Jinshi, well, it had been a while. He'd had no end of such business for her in the rear palace. Boy, that took her back. What exactly does he want? Shall I go to the Moon Prince's chambers? I believe a guide will be arriving shortly to assist with that. Chu looked outside just as Hulan hurried up. "Lady Maomao," he said. "Please pardon the intrusion." Yep, Chu said, standing at the door and answering for Maomao. "What seems to be the matter, my dear Hulan?" "I come on business from the Moon Prince." "I see Miss Chu has already brought you the message." "Yes, indeed I have, and I'll thank you not to steal my job." Maybe she means not to steal her chance to slack off, Maomao thought, automatically translating Chu's words as she heard them. "I would never." "That's not my intention in the least." "How much has she explained to you?" "We didn't get to the real meat of the situation," Chu volunteered. "I see. The matter is urgent, so perhaps I could explain on the way." "The carriage is already waiting." That wasn't a good sign, not least because once they were on their way, Maomao would be stuck even if it turned out to be something she wished she'd refused. "I'll thank you not to steal Miss Chu's job, my dear Hulan," Maomao said. Still, if this assignment was coming straight from Jinshi, she was going to end up doing it anyway. She might as well give in. All right, she said. Lehaku must have overheard them, because he was already preparing to leave. "Grab your medical equipment and come with me," Hulan said. "Have a nice trip." "Be careful," said the quack. He didn't look about to come with them, so the other two bodyguards stayed at the medical office. That should be enough to keep him safe. "Sure." "Right. Off I go," Maomao said. Then she stuffed some tools into a bag and left the office. The carriage took them to a building northeast of the western capital. On the trip, Maomao was told that there were some sick people there, and it would be appreciated if she could examine them. But when they arrived, "I know what this is," Maomao said breathlessly. "You looked so disinterested until a moment ago," Hulan said, mystified. "The young lady does like her drink," Lehaku said with affectionate exasperation. He. "What do you think?" "Not a bad place, huh?" said Chu, puffing out her chest as if she were somehow responsible for this. The smell of alcohol and grape wine was already filling their nostrils as they approached the building. If this wasn't a dreamland, then what was? They were at a winery. Maomao had tasted the western capital's finest wine several times. Maybe the stuff Hulan had brought the other day was from here. "Miss, you're, drooling," Lehaku said, nudging Maomao with his elbow. She quickly wiped her mouth. "Miss Maomao, let's get a few bottles as a souvenir before we go home." "Sounds good to me, Miss Chu." "I like the idea. But will anyone be able to stop you two once you get going?" Lehaku groaned. He really was a necessary substitute when Lahan's brother wasn't around to quip. "A few bottles, I think we might be able to swing." "My aunt runs the place, you see," Hulan said. "Happy news." "Your aunt?" "Meaning my father's younger sister," Hulan explained. "That would be Master Gyokuen's third daughter," Chu added. The one that Master Gyoku-ou's oldest son made so much trouble for?" Maomao asked, remembering what she had been told. How Shiki-u, the rat, had sold fake wine under this winery's name, eroding its reputation. "Yes, I'm afraid so. But don't worry. Auntie may be hard on my older brother Shiki-u, but she's relatively sweet with me." Hulan smiled awkwardly. "Ah, that's her." Maomao followed Hulan's gaze and saw a woman who, while beautiful, made her think of a predator. The aura she projected resembled termites, but this woman wore more makeup and her outfit was less reserved. She looked young, maybe in her late 20s, but Maomao would have expected Gyokuen's third daughter to be a bit older than that. "I know my aunt looks young, but she's in her late 30s, so please mind what you say and do," Hulan advised them. "All right, thank you," Maomao said, grateful for him clarifying exactly what she was wondering about. "This is the apothecary you arranged for?" the third daughter asked, giving Maomao an appraising look. "I am. My name is Maomao, Mom. I heard the master physician couldn't come because of an injury, and that you're here on his behalf. I wonder, are you going to be enough?" At the moment, they were still giving out that the quack doctor was recovering from his injured leg. In point of fact, he was mostly better, but the excuse seemed likely to keep working for them for a while yet. The quack himself wasn't eager to go out and about, anyway. "I'm of course no master physician, but I'll do everything in my power." "I'm told you have several ill people here. Might I go ahead and examine them?" Maomao asked. "Yes, all right. Come this way." Without another word, the third daughter started off, and Maomao followed her, equally silent. The third daughter brought Maomao to a break area of sorts. There were several beds. The place seemed to double as a nap room. 5 people lay there, all of them sallow and thin. Each clutched a bucket into which they occasionally vomited. Everything seemed fine this morning, but by noon, they were like this. I had them isolated out of concern that it might be something catching. A wise decision, Mom. Maomao put on a smock and covered her mouth with a handkerchief. What do you want me to do? Chu drawled. Could you bring me drinking water, salt, and sugar? I'm going to have a look at these people, and I think they're going to need hydration. If you can't get all that, a thin soup would be fine. Gotcha. Chu said and trotted off. I'll help Miss Chu, Hulan said, following her. And I'll keep watch at the door here, said Lihaku. Thank you, Master Lihaku. I'll call you if I need anything. If whatever this was turned out to be communicable, it wouldn't do for all of them to pile into the room together. Lihaku seemed to understand that. Sorry, but I'll wait out here too, the third daughter said, observing from a safe distance. It might look cold, but that's the smart move, Maomao thought. The woman was apparently Gyoku-ou's younger sister, but she acted nothing like him. If there was one thing the Yu family wasn't short on, it was distinct personalities. Maomao went into the room, starting her examinations with the patient who seemed to be in the worst shape. Of the 5, the one who appeared to be suffering most was an elderly, white-haired individual. Symptoms: vomiting, and the whole body seems hot. Head appears to hurt. She inspected the person's eyes and tongue, and took their pulse. They were listless and not very coherent, so Maomao tried talking to one of the patients who was comparatively better off. Could you describe your symptoms to me? Yes. I feel terrible. My head is pounding, I get so dizzy any time I try to stand up, and the nausea just won't go away. Nausea? Any stomachache or diarrhea? Number? No, none. I just feel queasy. That could mean. Maomao looked around the room. Everyone was showing roughly the same symptoms. Some of them occasionally threw up in their buckets, but nobody went racing for the bathroom. One more question, Maomao said. Then she asked the other patients the same thing. Based on their testimony, she was able to deduce the cause of the problem. Well, Maomao let out a long sigh and left the room. How was it? Did you learn anything? Asked the third daughter, keeping her distance for fear of infection. There's no need to worry about the disease spreading, Maomao replied. No? What's causing this, then? All 5 of those people were taste testers for the wine. The oldest drank more than the rest, it seems. Don't tell me. My wine isn't poisoned, is it? Maomao shook her head. It's just a hangover. Or well, maybe it's a bit early to call it that. Maybe we should just call it a vicious case of drunkenness. Maomao took off her neckerchief and smock. Drunkenness? Not possible. No winery hand would get soused from a little taste test. They'd have to chug down distilled spirits to start feeling it. Do you make distilled spirits? Maomao asked, her eyes sparkling. They do, but they're currently in the process of fermenting. Isn't that right, Auntie? Hulan broke in. He was carrying a large pot. Miss Maomao, we brought soup left over from yesterday, and some juice. Chu, meanwhile, had a ceramic vessel full of fruit juice. Thank you. Maomao opened the lid of Hulan's pot, picked up the ladle, and stirred the contents. Let's see here. The balance of salt and water was almost perfect, while the ingredients of the soup included vegetables, mushrooms, and meat. This is from yesterday. Did all the patients eat it? Yes, I think so, but a number of other people ate it as well, so I don't think the soup is the problem. I had some too, and I'm fine. Nonetheless, Maomao gave the soup a good, hard look. She fished up some of the ingredients with the ladle, picked them up in a pair of chopsticks, and inspected them. And no one felt ill yesterday? She asked. I don't think so. In that case, could you call someone who ate this soup yesterday? All right. Give me a moment. The third daughter summoned a servant, who soon brought several people to Maomao. I'd like to ask you some questions. First, could you tell me in detail what you've had to eat and drink for the last several days? The winery staff who had been brought to her were puzzled by the request, but they told her. One of their number was looking a little pale, So Maomao questioned him closely. The third daughter looked less than pleased to discover that one of her employees had been concealing an illness. "Why didn't you say anything?" she demanded. The man only said, "I'm sorry." It seemed he had been thinking that if he took off from work, he would be paid less. "Please do not hide things like this from me. You know that hiding a problem only makes it worse." While the third daughter was busy upbraiding her employee, Maomao went over the list of food again. "I knew it," she said. "Knew what?" The third daughter looked at her, perplexed. "This isn't an illness and it isn't poison. Everyone really is just hungover." "What makes you so sure?" "Was this soup prepared on site here?" "It certainly was," Chu chirped. "And everyone suffering from this condition had the soup?" "Yes, yes, as I believe I told you. Wine production requires constant attention, so people take turns sleeping here." "That soup was last night's dinner. But it obviously didn't lay everyone low. I ate it myself." Maomao fished up the ingredients again. "You see this dried mushroom? These were presumably put in here to make the stock." "Mushrooms? We don't see many of those around here." Now the third daughter was genuinely puzzled. In I-sei Province, it was typical to use meat or bones to make stock, or maybe fish in the coastal areas. "I don't know everything about every kind of mushroom, of course, but I strongly suspect this is the cause of the vomiting," said Maomao. "But why?" "I ate that soup myself, and I feel fine." "I think this mushroom includes a component that, in effect, makes people unable to hold their alcohol." Maomao had heard of cases like this more than once before. "A mushroom can do that?" "Really?" Hulan asked, surprised. "Yes, it can. It interferes with the body's ability to metabolize alcohol." Mushrooms, indeed, held many surprises. There were so many kinds, and a great many of them were toxic when eaten raw. Moreover, in many cases the toxic effect was delayed, with onset anywhere from several hours to several days after consumption. So people sometimes ate mushrooms without realizing they were taking in slow-acting poisons. Anyone who has alcohol within several days of eating this mushroom, even the strongest of drinkers, is going to get very, very drunk, or so I'm told. She had to hedge her language because this was, after all, just something she had heard. She didn't want to be so irresponsible as to say something with certainty that she wasn't actually certain of. "Admittedly, I've never consumed this mushroom myself. I only speak on hearsay, and don't personally know if it really does what they claim. As such, I'd like to be sure." With that, she dunked the ladle into the soup, pulled up some mushrooms, and slipped them right into her mouth. "Do you have any wine?" she asked. "Wine? Yes, preferably something dry, please." She thought she felt the third daughter giving her a particularly hard stare, but she decided to ignore it. The other woman called to a servant to bring a drink, and the man soon appeared with a jar of wine. "All right, here I go." And gulp. Maomao stuck out her tongue. "It's a very round flavor. There's just a hint of fruity sweetness left over, but only enough to give it a pleasant accent." She ate another mushroom to go along with her drink, then she had another cup of wine, and another. Now she's just drinking, right?" Hulan asked Lihaku. "She does like her wine, but she likes poison just as much." "That girl drinks like a fish. I don't think even I could outdrink her." He hadn't really answered Hulan's question. "I can hear you, you know." "Let him talk." The wine was so good, she couldn't stop drinking it. She felt her body getting warmer, her mood getting brighter. "Oops, careful." She observed her hands and saw that they were bright red. The warmth spreading throughout her body started to become uncomfortably hot, and then she pitched unsteadily. That pleasant floaty feeling intensified until her head was spinning. "Whoa. Hey, miss." Lihaku held her up. He sounded so far away. "Hello, Miss Maomao." "Pardon me." Maomao registered Chu flexing her fingers, and then jamming them into Maomao's mouth. Blug! There was a collective gasp of dismay. Chu offered Maomao some fruit juice to leaven the sour taste in her mouth. She slowly started to feel like her body was coming back to earth. Dizzily, she lifted her head. "I'm usually quite a strong drinker, but well, you see." The third daughter and Hulan looked aghast at Maomao, who was covered in vomit. "Your employees should recover from their hangovers soon enough." Maomao wiped the sick from her lips, still feeling unsteady. Why yes, all right. But may I ask you one thing? The third daughter had begun to take a more polite tone with Maomao. It didn't seem to be an expression of respect so much as a way of verbally keeping her distance. Yes. Was there some reason you had to eat the soup yourself just to prove your point? Yes. oi_nd_code_F_C7B0F_27C1D5F051570.I3.jpg. Oh, you know. It was the perfect excuse to drink some wine, obviously. Even Maomao knew she couldn't say that out loud. She settled for a pleasant smile. Chapter 7. The Inheritance. Maomao was nursing a throbbing headache. This is it. She was experiencing that fabled thing called a hangover. She wasn't sure it counted as a hangover if it hadn't been an entire day, but having a headache after you stopped being drunk was one of the primary symptoms, wasn't it? Rattling along in the carriage only made her feel even worse. It wasn't pleasant. And yet, this is something new. Maomao was downright moved to experience something she never had before. It felt a bit like being bitten by a highly venomous snake. And there was a poisonous herb she'd eaten once that had given her nausea like this. Which one was it, again? She was enjoying searching her memory for it. You don't look like you're quite better, Miss Maomao. Do you tend to be a happy drunk? Chu asked. There's just a little bit left in me that didn't come up. A happy drunk? Ha ha ha. Oh, if there's any of those mushrooms left, give them to me. I'd like to enjoy this a little longer. Even Miss Chu is going to get tired of this, she said. Anyway, I'll go see about those mushrooms. Maomao didn't know for certain how powerful the drunken shrooms really were, but she had heard that even a full day after you ate them, alcohol could still have an outsized effect on you. It wasn't like you could never drink again, but it was best to steer clear for a while. A real shame, actually, since they'd gotten some wine as a souvenir. Miss Chu would feel bad having to make you vomit again. I wonder if there's anything left to come up but stomach juices. It's all right. I'm feeling much better. Please stop flexing your fingers and trying to stick them in my mouth. Say, you don't have anything to write with, do you? Chu offered her parchment and a writing instrument. She didn't have a brush, though, just a pen, so it was hard to use. The ink went everywhere as Maomao tried to write with the ungainly instrument. In the bounce-in carriage, her handwriting looked almost as unsteady as her stomach. What's that? Chu asked, peeking over her shoulder. Here. I made a note of the mushroom I think was in that soup, along with quantity of alcohol. This is what kind of effect I've observed at various time intervals from ingesting it. I'm thinking I'll continue to make new entries every 30 minutes, so please give me the rest of the mushrooms. You had to be sure to repeat the important things. You seem to be having a lot of fun for someone who looks so pale, Miss Maomao. Yeah, you almost make me think of Sir Lahan, Lihaku said. What a strange person to think of. A dark expression overtook Maomao's pallid face, and she felt herself get a little less drunk. Please don't mention such untoward names. Wait. Do you know him, Master Lihaku? Maomao considered the matter. Even if Lihaku and Lahan knew each other, she had a way of not remembering things that didn't personally interest her. Well, I mean, not directly. But you know, I do technically serve under that old fart. I have to go to his office sometimes, and we've bumped into each other now and again. Besides, he's very distinctive. You don't forget him. Huh? Maomao, profoundly not interested, began to clean up her writing utensils. Also, before we left for the western capital, he said, take care of my little sister for me, and gave me some snacks. He's a complete stranger. Oh, right. I almost forgot. Lihaku might not be much for quips, but he was easy to work with. So, getting back to the mushrooms, the question is why a winery would even have mushrooms that make you super drunk, right? Yes, but the mushrooms weren't the only ingredients. There were a lot of things in that soup. Maomao cocked her head. Do mushrooms even grow in the western capital? They tended to prefer warm, moist environments. The dry air of the western region didn't seem very congenial to them. I think you could grow them, but probably not a lot of them, Chu said. Maomao agreed. She pictured the mushrooms that had been in the soup. The drunkenness-inducing mushrooms Maomao was familiar with were often found in pine forests. She doubted they could be found among the grassy plains of I-sei Province. I wonder if that means they came with a shipment from the central region, said Chu. I guess that's what it would work out to? Maomao made a thoughtful sound. It was too neat to be coincidence. It seemed distinctly like someone had deliberately included those mushrooms in order to cause an epidemic of drunkenness at the winery. But what would the motive be? No point thinking about things I can't possibly know. She should pick something else to wrap up first. This ability to change gears without a second thought was one of Maomao's virtues.